Why do you keep trying to become something you are not yet willing to be? Not in action, not in effort, but in identity. Because if you look closely, the struggle is never in what you do. It is always in what you assume yourself to be. You say you want something, a different life, a different result, a different version of yourself. But beneath that desire, there is something quieter, something more honest. A silent statement you keep repeating without noticing. I am not that yet. And that is the only reason it is not. You have been taught to believe that imagination is secondary, that it is something you use to escape reality. But what if that is the inversion? What if imagination is not escaping reality, but generating it? What if the world you keep reacting to is not the cause of your life, but the echo of what you are being? Pause for a moment. What are you assuming right now? Not what you say you believe, not what you hope is true, but what you quietly feel when no one is watching. Because that feeling is not passive, it is creative. There is a reason you can sit still, and yet your life keeps moving. There is a reason events unfold without your physical effort arranging them, because something deeper is arranging them, and that something is not outside you. It is the one thing you have never been taught to trust fully, your own awareness of being. Your imagination is not a tool. It is identity in motion, and everything you see is shaped by it. There was a man who inherited a company at a moment when everything was collapsing. Orders were disappearing. The future was uncertain. The system that once supported him was gone. Externally, it looked like decline. But internally, something else was happening. He did not wait for proof. He did not ask the world for permission. He imagined something that did not yet exist and stayed with it. Not for a day, not for a week, but for years. And while the world doubted, while logic questioned, while even giants dismissed the idea, he remained in a state, not a plan, not a strategy, a state. A quiet, persistent assumption, this is real. And slowly, reality began to agree. Not instantly, not magically, but inevitably. Because reality does not resist you, it reflects you. A strong imagination begets the event. But not because imagination is powerful in itself. Because imagination is you. You are not using imagination. You are imagining always. Even now. Even when you think you are being realistic. Even when you think you are just observing. You are selecting a state. And that state is selecting your world. So the question is not, can imagination change reality? The question is, which version of reality are you already imagining into being? Are you trying or are you being? Because trying belongs to someone who does not have. Being belongs to someone who already is. And reality only responds to one of those. You can spend years wanting something, hoping for it, working toward it. But if your identity remains unchanged, nothing moves. Because the world does not respond to effort. It responds to assumption. This is why two people can take the same action and receive completely different results. One is acting from lack. The other is acting from embodiment. Outwardly, they look identical. Inwardly, they are opposite. And the world mirrors that difference. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed how sometimes, before anything changes, you feel different first, as if something shifted internally, and then reality rearranged itself to match? That is not coincidence. That is the mechanism. You are not becoming something. You are selecting a version of yourself and stepping into it. And the moment you do, the world begins to reorganize around that identity. Not because you forced it, but because it has no choice. Reality does not argue with you. It simply echoes what you are being. So if you remain in the state of I want, you will experience wanting. If you remain in the state of I hope, you will experience waiting. But if you dare, even briefly, to assume it is already mine, something changes, not outside first, inside. And that inner shift is the beginning of everything. If it were already yours, how would you feel? Not think, feel. Because thinking describes, feeling embodies. And embodiment is what creates. This is why effort alone fails. Because effort tries to change the outside, while identity remains unchanged. But creation does not begin outside. It begins in the unseen, in the quiet assumption you carry when no one is there to confirm it. This is why faith is misunderstood. It is not belief in something external. It is loyalty to an inner state before it becomes visible. And that loyalty is what hardens into fact. So when you hear believe in God, understand what that means. Not a distant force, not something above you, but the only thing that has ever created anything in your life, your own imagination. You are not separate from reality. You are its source. And once you see this, everything changes. Not because the world becomes different, but because you finally stop waiting for it to. What makes a desire powerless is not that it is too big. It is that you keep standing outside of it. You look at it. You admire it. You long for it. But you do not enter it. And because you do not enter it, you keep calling it future. That is the real distance. Not miles, not time, not circumstances. Identity. The version of you who wants the thing is not the version of you who has it. And reality is loyal to the version you are being now. That is why so many people remain trapped in effort. They think persistence means repeating the desire. But repetition of desire is not the same as possession. Saying I want this again and again only deepens the experience of not having it, because wanting is still separation. It still says that is over there. I am over here. There is a gap, and the world reflects that gap with perfect obedience. So the deeper question is no longer what do I want, but who would I be if it were already done? That is the question that turns imagination into power, because it moves you from fantasy into embodiment. If you were already the one you long to become, how would you see the day? Would you still feel uncertain? Would you still speak inwardly from lack? Would you still keep checking the outer world for permission to feel different? No. You would be settled. Not excited in a frantic way, not dramatic, not desperate, just inwardly settled. And that stillness is one of the surest signs of the fulfilled state. Because the fulfilled state does not strain, it does not chase, it does not beg. It quietly knows. This is what most people miss when they hear that imagination creates reality. They think they must imagine harder, brighter, longer, more often. But the issue is rarely vividness alone. The issue is identification. Can you move from I am thinking about it to I am thinking from it? That is the shift. Thinking about wealth is not wealth. Thinking from wealth is. Thinking about love is not love. Thinking from being loved is. Thinking about freedom is not freedom. Thinking from already being free is. And once you begin to think from the state, you stop asking reality to catch up every second. You stop monitoring. You stop digging up the seed to check if it has roots. Because you know something more important than proof. You know where you are inwardly. What are you assuming right now? Not in the dramatic moments. In the ordinary ones. In the pauses. In the quiet. Because the ordinary inner conversations reveal your real state far more than your inspirational moments ever will. A person can spend 10 minutes visualizing success, and the rest of the day feeling overlooked, delayed, and powerless. Which state do you think reality obeys? Not the occasional one, the dominant one, the one you return to when you stop trying. So if you want to change your life, you must become aware of your returns. Where does your mind go when nothing is forcing it? Back to fear, back to delay, back to old resentment, back to the story that nothing ever works. That return is your current state. And until that return changes, the outer pattern stays loyal to it. This is why imagination must become more than an exercise. It must become residence, a place you dwell in, a place you return to so often that it begins to feel like home. And home is the word that matters. Because whatever feels like home to consciousness becomes natural. And what becomes natural becomes real. You do not manifest what feels impossible to you for long. You manifest what feels like, this is just who I am. That is why changing identity matters more than forcing outcomes. Outcomes are unstable when identity is not aligned. A person can touch a new result briefly, then lose it, because inwardly they never stop being the old self. So the work is not first to hold the thing. It is to become the one who can hold it naturally. Are you trying to get something or become someone? Because the first creates tension. The second creates coherence. And coherence is powerful. When your inner state and your desire no longer contradict each other, reality begins to move with much less friction. This is what the world calls luck. But it is not luck. It is alignment. The right conversation appears. The strange opportunity opens. The perfect timing seems to happen on its own. A person says yes where another would have said no. And from the outside, it looks accidental. But it is not. It is the bridge of incident taking shape around a sustained assumption. You do not need to force the bridge. You need to remain in the state that requires the bridge. That is a very different thing. And this is why doubt delays more than difficulty ever could. Difficulty is not fatal. Contradiction is not fatal. Delay is not fatal. But abandoning the state that resets the pattern, not because you are punished, because you return to the old arrangement. If you assume one thing at night and identify with the opposite all day, you are sending consciousness back into division. And division weakens expression. So the secret is not perfection, it is return. You drift, return. You doubt, return. You react, return. You forget, return. Again and again and again until the new state becomes easier to inhabit than the old one. That is when it begins to stabilize. And stabilization is what changes the world. If it were already yours, how would you feel right now? Stay with that. Not to impress yourself, not to force emotion, but to notice the texture of the state, its pace, its tone, its inner climate. Does it feel hurried? No. Does it feel needy? No. Does it feel like chasing? No. It feels complete. And completeness is creative, because completeness does not reach, it radiates. This is also why true faith feels simpler than people expect. It is not noisy. It is not theatrical. It is not the constant declaration that you believe. It is the quieter refusal to leave the state once entered. That is faith. Loyalty to the unseen reality long enough for it to become seen. So the next time you catch yourself saying, I want this, pause and ask something deeper. If I already were this, what would be different in me? Then do not merely admire the answer. Enter it. Because imagination becomes power the moment you stop visiting the fulfilled state and begin living there. Have you noticed how easily you believe in what you can already see, and how difficult it feels to trust what has not yet appeared, and yet everything you now call real was once unseen? Not because it did not exist, but because you had not yet become aware of it. So the question is not whether something is real. The question is, where are you aware from? Because awareness is what selects reality. Not effort, not time, not permission. Awareness. This is why you can sit in the same room with two different people. And each of you lives in a completely different world. One sees opportunity, the other sees limitation. One feels supported, the other feels ignored. One expects things to work, the other expects disappointment. The environment is identical, the experience is not. Because the world is not happening to you, it is happening through you. You are not observing reality. You are participating in it by the state you occupy. And that state is not neutral, it is active. It is constantly projecting itself outward as conditions, as events, as encounters. That is why the same patterns repeat until the state changes. Not because life is punishing you, but because life is consistent. It reflects the assumption you continue to hold, even when you say you want something else. This is the part that most people resist. They want a new result without leaving the old identity. They want change without transformation. But the world does not rearrange itself for who you wish you were. It rearranges itself for who you are being. So if you carry the identity of I struggle, I never get what I want, things don't work out for me, then even when something good appears, you will interpret it through that filter. You will doubt it, delay it, undermine it, and eventually return to the familiar. Because the familiar feels safe, even when it limits you. So the real work is not to fight circumstances. It is to outgrow the identity that keeps recreating them. Are you reacting to reality or creating from a state? Because reacting keeps you tied to what already is. Creating begins from what is not yet seen. And this is where imagination reveals its true nature. It is not merely visual. It is not about pictures. It is about perspective. From where are you seeing the world? From lack or from fulfillment? From fear or from certainty? From waiting or from already being? That shift is everything. Because once you move into the state of already being, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop asking, when will it happen? How will it happen? Why is it not here yet? Because those questions only exist for the version of you who does not have it. But when you are in the state of fulfillment, those questions dissolve. Not because you answer them, because they no longer belong to you. That is the sign you have shifted. Not that everything outside changed instantly, but that something inside no longer needs confirmation. That is power. Not control over events, but freedom from dependence on them. And from that freedom, events begin to change. Not because you force them, because you're no longer contradicting them. Think about it. If you are constantly checking the world to see if it has changed, what are you really assuming? That it has not. And that assumption delays the change. But if you rest inwardly in the knowing, even without evidence, you remove the resistance. And reality moves faster because you are no longer holding it back. Are you waiting or already being? Because waiting is still a state, and it produces more waiting. Being is also a state, and it produces experience. This is why the simplest shift is often the most powerful. Not adding more effort, but removing contradiction. Not doing more, but being clearer. And clarity is not about understanding every detail. It is about knowing who you are in relation to what you desire. Are you separate from it, or are you its source? Because if you are still treating it as something outside, something you must reach, then you are still dividing yourself from it. And division weakens creation. But when you realize, I'm not trying to get this, I am expressing it, everything becomes simpler. You stop chasing, you start embodying. And embodiment is quiet. It does not need to announce itself, it does not need to prove anything, it simply is. This is why some people seem to move through life with ease, not because they never face challenges, but because they do not collapse into the state of struggle. they remain identified with a different version of themselves, and the world reflects that consistency. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. A brief moment of strong belief cannot compete with a long-held identity. So if you want to change your life, do not focus only on moments of inspiration. Focus on the version of you that remains after the moment passes. Who are you when you are not trying? Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when nothing is forcing you to think positively? That is the state that creates your world. And that is the state you must gently, persistently transform. Not by force, but by replacement. You do not fight the old self. You outgrow it by occupying something new long enough that the old one no longer feels like you. This is why imagination must become familiar. Not dramatic, not rare, but normal. As normal as thinking, as natural as breathing. You return to the state again and again until it stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like truth. And when it feels like truth, the world begins to agree, because reality does not question your identity. It confirms it. So the next time you feel the urge to react, pause and ask, what am I being right now? Not what is happening. What am I being? Because in that moment, you are not just experiencing reality. You are shaping it. And whether you realize it or not, you always have been. What if the world has never once opposed you, but has only ever reflected you? Not your words, not your intentions, not even your actions, but your state. Because a state is not what you say you are. It is what you return to without effort. It is the version of yourself that feels most natural, even when it limits you. And reality is loyal to that. This is why change often feels difficult. Not because it is impossible, but because you are attempting to change results while remaining faithful to the same state. And a state does not negotiate. It expresses. So if you carry the state of, I am overlooked, you will find yourself in situations where you are ignored. If you carry the state of, I am not chosen, you will meet outcomes that confirm it. Not because the world is against you, but because it is consistent with you. Reality does not argue. It agrees, even when you wish it would do otherwise. So the moment you begin to see this, you stop trying to force the world, and you begin to question something deeper. What am I being that keeps producing this? Because that question returns power to you, not as control, but as authorship. And authorship is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. It simply rewrites the script from within. Imagine your life as a stage, not in the sense of performance, but in the sense of expression. The roles change, the scenes change, the people enter and exit, but the script comes from somewhere deeper, not outside the stage, within the actor. And you are both. You are the one playing the role and the one writing it. But as long as you forget the writer, you feel trapped in the role, reacting, adjusting, surviving instead of creating. This is why awareness is everything. Not awareness of the world, but awareness of your state. Because once you see the state clearly, you are no longer inside it unconsciously. You can step out, and stepping out is the beginning of transformation. Are you trying to change reality or your state? Because those are not the same thing. Trying to change reality keeps you focused on what is. Changing your state shifts what will be. And the shift is subtle. You do not need to destroy the old identity. You simply withdraw attention from it and give your awareness to something new. At first, it may feel unfamiliar, even unnatural, because you are stepping into a version of yourself you have not yet practiced. But that is not a sign of falseness. It is a sign of transition. Everything that becomes natural was once unfamiliar. Everything that feels like this is just me was once something you had to step into. So do not confuse discomfort with impossibility. It is simply the space between identities. And that space is where creation happens. This is why imagination is not optional. It is essential. Because imagination is how you enter a state before the world reflects it. It is the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. But here is the deeper truth. You are not becoming. You are selecting. All states already exist. Every version of you already is. Confident or uncertain. Free or limited. Fulfilled or searching. You do not create these states. You move into them. And once you move into a state, it begins to express itself as your life. So the work is not to build something from nothing. It is to choose deliberately to become aware enough to say, this is who I am now. Not based on evidence, but based on decision. Because evidence follows identity, not the other way around. What if nothing needs to change except you? Not your circumstances, not other people, not timing, just you. And by you, we mean the state you occupy. Because once the state changes, everything else must follow. Not because you force it, because it cannot remain inconsistent. Reality seeks coherence. It reorganizes itself to match your assumption. So if you remain in contradiction, you experience friction. If you align, you experience flow. Flow is not luck. It is agreement between who you are being and what you are experiencing. And when that agreement deepens, life begins to feel different. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. You are no longer wanting one thing while identifying with another. You are no longer hoping while assuming the opposite. You become internally consistent, and that consistency is what stabilizes creation. So the next time you feel the urge to fix something outside, pause and ask, what state would naturally produce the life I want? Not what action, not what strategy, what state? And then step into it. Gently, quietly, without force, not to convince the world, but to become familiar with yourself in that state. Because once it feels natural, the world will begin to reflect it. Not instantly, but inevitably. Reality does not rush, but it does not forget either. It simply mirrors what you persist in being. So choose carefully, not with fear, but with awareness. Because every state you occupy is writing your life in real time. Why do you keep asking how when the how has never been yours to decide? Notice this. Every time you begin to imagine something new, almost immediately another voice appears. How is this going to happen? When will it happen? What if it doesn't? And in that moment, you leave the state. Because those questions do not belong to the version of you who already has it. They belong to the version of you still standing outside of it. This is where most people unknowingly break the process. Not because they lack imagination, but because they keep interrupting it. They enter the state and then step out of it to analyze it. But creation does not respond to analysis. It responds to assumption. An assumption is not logical. It is positional. It is where you stand inwardly. So when you ask how, you are not being curious. You are returning to doubt. You are asking the outer world to explain something that must first be accepted within. But the outer world has no instructions to give you. It only has reflections. And reflections always come after the state, never before. So the real shift is this. You stop trying to understand how it will happen and begin to stabilize who you are being. Because once the state is stable, the how unfolds on its own. Not as a single event, but as a sequence, a bridge of incidents you could not have planned, a conversation you did not expect, a delay that turns out to be alignment, a redirection that feels accidental, until it reveals its purpose. From the outside, it looks random. From within the state, it feels inevitable, because the bridge is not created by effort. It is selected by identity. This is why control is not required. In fact, control interferes, because control is rooted in fear. It says, I must make this happen, or it won't. But creation does not come from force. It comes from alignment. And alignment does not push. It allows, not passively, but confidently. There is a difference. Allowing is not waiting. Allowing is trusting the state you have entered, enough to remain in it, without needing to manage every detail. Are you trying to force reality, or allowing it to reflect you? Because forcing implies resistance. Allowing implies certainty. And certainty is quiet. It does not rush. It does not panic. It does not need immediate proof. It simply remains. This is why persistence is not repetition of effort. It is continuity of state. You are not trying harder. You are returning more faithfully, again and again, to the version of yourself who already is. And over time, that version begins to feel more real than the old one. That is when the shift becomes irreversible, because you are no longer trying to believe. You simply are. And when you are, the world must rearrange. Not because you demand it, because it cannot remain out of sync. Reality does not hold two versions of you at once. It reflects the one you occupy. So if you keep stepping in and out, the reflection appears unstable. Not because the process failed, because the signal changed. But when you remain, even gently, even imperfectly, the signal stabilizes. And what was once invisible begins to take form. If it were already yours, would you still be searching, or would you be living from it? That question reveals everything. Because searching belongs to absence. Living belongs to presence. And presence is where creation occurs. This is also why time feels different, depending on your state. When you are waiting, time feels slow. When you are fulfilled, time becomes irrelevant. Because fulfillment is not dependent on arrival. It is experienced now. And that now is what shapes what comes next. So the paradox is this: the less you chase, the faster things move. The less you question, the clearer things become. The less you interfere, the more reality organizes itself. Because you are no longer dividing the process. You are no longer stepping out of the state to check if it is working. You are remaining long enough for it to express. This is what trust really is. Not blind belief, but sustained identification. You know who you are, and you do not leave it, because the world has not yet caught up. That is strength, not emotional intensity, but inner stability. So the next time you feel the urge to ask how, pause and return to something simpler. What would it feel like if it were already done? Then stay there, not as an escape, but as your position, because from that position, everything begins to unfold. Not because you figured it out, but because you finally stopped interrupting it. What if the reason nothing seems to change is not because it isn't working, but because you keep leaving the state before it stabilizes? Look closely. You imagine something, you feel it. For a moment, it feels real. And then something small happens. A delay, a message not answered, an unexpected outcome. And immediately you react, you interpret, you question, you return to the old identity, not consciously, but automatically. And in that moment, you undo the continuity. Because continuity is what gives power to a state, not intensity, not how strongly you felt it once, but how consistently you return to it when it is challenged. This is where most people misunderstand persistence. They think persistence means repeating affirmations, repeating visualizations, repeating effort. But persistence is not repetition. It is loyalty. Loyalty to a state even when the outer world has not confirmed it, because the outer world will always show you the past first. It reflects who you were, not immediately who you are becoming. So when you react to what you see, you are reacting to an echo of a state you previously occupied. And by reacting to it, you return to it. That is how cycles repeat, not because you are stuck, but because you are responding to reflections as if they are causes. Are you reacting to the echo or remaining in the source? Because the source is always within and the echo is always outside. If you let the echo define your state, you lose authorship. But if you remain in the source, the echo must change, not instantly, but inevitably. This is why discipline is internal, not external. You do not discipline your actions first. You discipline your identification. You choose again and again not to fall back into the old version of yourself just because it feels familiar. And this requires awareness, not force, because force creates tension, but awareness creates choice. You begin to notice the moment right before you react, the moment when something happens and you feel the pull back into the old state. That moment is power, because in that moment you can decide, do I return or do I remain? And remaining, even once, begins to weaken the old pattern. Remaining twice begins to shift the baseline. Remaining consistently replaces the identity. That is how transformation happens. Not through one breakthrough, but through many quiet refusals to go back. What are you assuming right now when things do not go your way? Because that reveals your true state. Not when everything feels good, but when it doesn't. Do you assume this isn't working? Or do you remain in it is already done? That difference determines the outcome. Because the world is not responding to your best moments. It is responding to your most consistent ones. And consistency is tested in contradiction. When what you see does not match what you assume, that is where identity is either strengthened or abandoned. This is also why emotional control is not about suppression. It is about direction. You are not trying to eliminate feeling. You are choosing which feeling you identify with. Because feelings are signals of state, not commands. You can feel doubt and not become it. You can feel uncertainty and not return to it. You can observe reaction without entering it. That is mastery. Not perfection, but awareness sustained. And the more you practice this, the more space you create between stimulus and identity. That space is where creation becomes deliberate instead of automatic. Because most people are not creating consciously, they're reacting consistently. And reaction repeats the past. Creation selects the future. So if you want something new, you must interrupt the pattern. Not outside, inside, at the level of assumption, at the level of identity, at the level of this is who I am. Because that is where everything begins. If it were already yours, would this moment change your state? Or would you remain the same? That question reveals your stability, because the fulfilled version of you is not fragile. It does not collapse at the first contradiction. It remains quietly, confidently, not because everything is perfect, but because it knows what is true. And truth is not determined by appearances. It is determined by awareness. So the more you remain, the less power appearances have. They begin to lose their authority. They become what they always were, temporary reflections, not final outcomes. And when you stop treating them as final, you stop reacting to them. And when you stop reacting, you stop recreating them. This is the turning point. Not when the world changes, but when you stop letting it define you. Because once that happens, you are no longer inside the cycle. You are above it. And from that position, you can choose. Not once, but continuously. And that continuous choice is what reshapes your life. What if the life you are living right now is not the result of what you did, but the result of what you kept being? Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Because consistency is what turns a state into a world. And most people do not realize this. They are not suffering from lack of desire. They are suffering from loyalty to an old identity. A quiet, invisible loyalty. One that shows up in small moments. The way you interpret silence. The way you react to delay. The way you speak to yourself when nothing is happening. These moments seem insignificant, but they are not. They are repetitions. And repetition is what builds reality. So when you say nothing is changing, what you are often experiencing is perfect consistency, just not in the direction you want. Because the state you return to most often is still the same. And reality is simply honoring that. This is why change begins to feel possible. The moment you stop trying to fix everything and start observing what you are being, not what you want, not what you hope, what you are being. Because being is what creates. You can desire one thing and be something completely different. And the world will always reflect what you are being, not what you say you want. So the deeper work is this. You become aware of your inner conversations, not just the loud ones, the subtle ones, the automatic ones, the ones that run in the background and shape your sense of self. Because those conversations are not harmless. They are instructions, and the world follows them. If you quietly think, this always happens to me, reality listens. If you assume, I am always overlooked, reality organizes itself accordingly. Not because it is judging you, but because it is reflecting you. This is why imagination is not only visual, it is conversational. It is the silent dialogue you have with yourself throughout the day. And that dialogue is constantly reinforcing a state. So if you want to change your life, you must change the tone of that conversation. Not artificially, not by forcing positivity, but by shifting identity. Instead of, why is this happening to me? You begin to move into, this is already working out. Instead of, I hope this changes, you move into, it has changed. And at first, it may feel unfamiliar, even false, because you are speaking from a version of yourself you have not yet stabilized. But over time, that voice becomes natural. And when it becomes natural, it becomes dominant. And when it becomes dominant, it becomes reality. Are you thinking from your current situation or from your chosen identity? Because that distinction is everything. Thinking from your situation keeps you tied to what is. Thinking from your identity moves you into what will be. And the more you practice this, the more you notice something subtle. You stop reacting immediately. You begin to pause. And in that pause, you remember who you chose to be. That pause is where transformation lives. Because in that pause, you are no longer automatic. You are aware. And awareness gives you choice. Choice to return to the old state or remain in the new one. And every time you remain, you strengthen it. Every time you return, you reinforce the past. So the question is not, did I do it perfectly? The question is, which state did I return to? Because return is what defines identity. Not intention, not effort. Return. This is why the process is simple, but not always easy, because it requires honesty. You must be willing to see what you have been assuming, without blame, without judgment, just awareness. Because once you see it, you can change it. Not by fighting it, but by replacing it. You do not argue with the old state, you outgrow it. By occupying something new more often, more consistently, until the old one no longer feels like you. And when that happens, your world begins to change. Not because you forced it, because you became someone else. If it were already yours, how would you speak to yourself right now? That question reveals the next step. Because speech reflects state, and state creates experience. So speak not to convince yourself, but to express who you are now, quietly, naturally, without strain. Because the more natural it feels, the more powerful it becomes. And the more powerful it becomes, the less you need to try. Because you are no longer reaching, you are expressing. And expression is what reality reflects. What if you were never waiting for reality to change? But reality has always been waiting for you, not for your effort, not for your timing, not for your circumstances, for your decision. Because everything you have heard, everything you have felt, has been pointing to one simple truth. You are not separate from what you experience. You are its source, not in a distant, abstract way, but in the most immediate sense. What you are being is what you are living. And once you see this clearly, you can no longer return to the old way of thinking. The idea that something outside you is controlling your life begins to dissolve. Because you begin to notice something undeniable. Every change began within you first. A shift in feeling, a quiet certainty, a different way of seeing, and then the world followed. Not because you forced it, because you allowed it, because you stopped contradicting it. This is the final shift. Not doing more, not trying harder, but becoming still enough to recognize who you already are. Because you are not becoming the creator. You are remembering that you are. And that remembrance changes everything. You stop chasing. You stop searching. You stop asking, when will it happen? Because you understand something deeper. It is already done at the level that creates. And the only thing left is to remain there. Not as an act, not as a technique, but as identity. This is why the simplest truth is often the most difficult to accept. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be earned. Only assumed, because assumption is the doorway. Not effort, not time, not permission. Assumption. And what you assume, you become. And what you become, you experience. That is the sequence. Always has been, always will be. So when you say, I want this, pause and see the hidden message inside it. I am not this yet. And then gently, without force, without struggle, shift it, not by denying the desire, but by fulfilling it within. I am this. Not as a statement to repeat, but as a state to enter, and once entered, to remain. Even when the world looks unchanged, even when nothing seems different, even when doubt tries to return, because remaining is what makes it real. And reality cannot resist what is consistently assumed, not forever, not indefinitely. Eventually, it must reflect it. That is law, not belief, law. So the final question is not, will this work? The final question is, will I remain? Because everything depends on that. not your intelligence, not your background, not your circumstances, your willingness to stay in the state of already being, to stay in the identity of fulfillment, to stay in the feeling of completion until it becomes natural, until it becomes obvious, until it becomes you. And when it becomes you, you will not need to look for results, because results will be looking for you quietly, effortlessly, inevitably, because reality does not chase, it reflects. And it has been reflecting you all along. So now you can choose, not once, but now, again and again and again, until the choice becomes who you are. And when that happens, you will see what was always true. You were never trying to create a new life. You were remembering the one that was already yours,